Hey guys, it's Victoria and welcome back to Femhead. Today I want to talk about a little bit of an odd topic, but it is related to all of this. I asked what you guys wanted to hear about and multiple people said this, and it was all about motherhood, breastfeeding, and fam, charting your cycle while being a mother. And I thought, this is a very good, I was curious about it and I figured I could use my resources and my knowledge to answer your question. Let me preface all of this by saying I've never had a child, I've never been pregnant, I've never breastfed. One day I hope to check all of this off my bucket list and then I can give you a more in-depth recap of this topic. But for now, I feel like I can offer some advice to you guys from what I know from my side of things. So I want to break this video into two parts today. The first, how breastfeeding can affect your returning fertility, and number two, the potential challenges that come along with charting as a mom. And before I start this next session, let me say this is not me teaching you how to chart as a mom. If you are curious about this and you want to learn more, go out and do your research. Get educated. This is me simply just starting the conversation today. And since I didn't have any personal experience with any of this, I went to the Bible, Taking Charge of Fertility, and this is what I had to say. My biggest takeaway from what I learned is the degree to which you breastfeed affects how quickly your fertility returns. And it's broken up into 3 levels: not breastfeeding at all, partially breastfeeding, and exclusively breastfeeding. It's the suckling of your baby on your breast that sends a signal to indirectly suppress the hormones that trigger ovulation. And I know that sounds very complicated, but essentially it's the baby's action on your boob that is suppressing your fertility. But just because you're breastfeeding doesn't mean that you're not fertile. For this to work efficiently, it is said that you have to be breastfeeding every 4 hours during the day and every 6 hours at night. And this brings me to the second thing I learned, which is something called the lactational amenorrhea method. Because if you do exclusively breastfeed at that frequency of every 4 hours during the day and every 6 hours at night, you can technically use the lactational amenorrhea method. And even if you are partially breastfeeding, but we'll get into that in a second. I'm gonna abbreviate it by calling it LAM from now on. I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's what I'm gonna call it. You can use LAM if your period is not returned, if you are fully or almost fully breastfeeding, and if your baby is less than 6 months old. But there is a 56-day post-birth cutoff for this. Any bleeding before this 56th day can be considered postpartum bleeding, but anything after this should be considered menstrual bleeding, and therefore a return of fertility and ovulation. Interestingly enough, the failure rate for LAM is less than 2%, which means that it is more than 98% effective. But I will get into this also in a second. Because regardless of how frequent you are breastfeeding, you really need to pay attention to your cervical fluid, because that is going to signal a return of fertility. Okay, moving on to partial breastfeeding, which means you supplement less than 15% of the time. You can follow LAM, but you have to use the 2 anovulatory rules that go along with that, which are the unchanging day rule and the patch rule, which requires you to establish a basic and fertile pattern following the 2 weeks after your post-birth bleeding. But once your period returns after that 56th day cutoff, you have to go back to using the standard FAM method. Finally, if you're not breastfeeding at all, you can expect your fertility to return actually quite quickly, anywhere between 4 to 10 weeks. And this means you'll have to start charting soon after birth. But like I said, regardless of the level of breastfeeding that you're doing, you really need to pay attention to your cervical fluid, because this is what is going to indicate your returning fertility. One thing I found interesting is that once your cycle does return and you have a thermal shift, that you have to consider any cervical fluid fertile, even that sticky quality fluid that was once the non-fertile fluid. So to recap all of that, you can get pregnant even if you're breastfeeding. So if you're not breastfeeding at all, you have to go back to using the standard FAM rules, and you have to start charting within 14 days of birth. If you're partially breastfeeding, you have to use FAM with those 2 anovulatory rules, and you should start taking your basal body temperature once you notice a change in your cervical fluid. You have a bleeding episode past that 56th day mark, your baby decreases suckling or starts in on solid foods. And then finally, if you are exclusively breastfeeding, you should start taking your basal body temperature when you have your first bleeding episode after that 56th day mark, or your baby is 5 to 6 months old, or you decrease the amount of breastfeeding or introduce solid foods. Okay, now into the potential challenges that mothers may face when it comes to charting and being a mom. So as we talked about above, depending on your level of breastfeeding, you're going to eventually have to start taking your basal body temperature again. Sure, this is all good and well, but when you have a baby, I can only imagine the challenges that come along with taking a consistent basal body temperature every single morning. I'm sure that when you're a new mom, getting 4 hours of sleep straight is a a feat. Not only that, but if you do get those 4 hours of sleep, waking up and then taking the 60 to 90 seconds to take your temperature while your baby's screaming can seem a bit impossible. I can totally see where charting is hard as a new mom, but from what we've learned today, it is crucial to really focus on your cervical fluid. And this is where I suggest getting your partner involved. I don't think we give our partners credit or the opportunity to help us out to the degree we might need. And so you need to explain to them the importance of being able to take your temperature in the morning, as well as to spend an extra 10 seconds in the bathroom checking your fluid. And I'm sure if they're as exhausted or just worn out as you are from the new baby, that they're going to be more than willing to help you prevent another pregnancy before you two are ready. Is charting harder with the baby? There is no doubt about it, but I definitely think it is doable. And from what I've heard, you don't jump right back into the sack. You got to give yourself some time to heal, some time to spend time with baby, and then you can get back into that relationship with your partner. And so I think you have a little bit of a window there. Now I will get back to you when I've had a baby, because in the end, what do I even know? Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on my next video. Bye!